Something strange happens somewhere after 50. A decision that would have kept you up half the night in your 20s. Replaying it, doubting it, rewriting it in your head. You make it now in about a minute, calmly, and you don't second guess it later. You barely even notice you're doing it differently. A friend brings you a messy situation. Two people fighting, both absolutely convinced they're right. In your 20s, you would have picked a side almost immediately, out of loyalty more than judgment. Now, you somehow see both sides clearly, without even trying that hard to stay fair about it. An argument starts to spiral the exact way it always used to. The same tone, the same old triggers. But instead of getting pulled under by it, you stay oddly calm, almost like you're watching the whole thing from slightly outside yourself. You didn't consciously decide to react this way, it just happened. You catch yourself giving advice you genuinely wish someone had given you 30 years ago. Advice that sounds almost obvious now, but would have completely changed how things unfolded back then. Where did this particular kind of clarity even come from? And why does it feel so unforced? You notice you're less rattled by things that used to wreck your entire week. A rude comment, an unexpected delay, a small disappointment. It still registers, you still feel it, but it passes through you faster now without the long spiral that used to reliably follow right behind it. So here's the question worth actually asking. Honestly, is this simply what getting older feels like, or is something real happening inside your brain? Something quietly making your judgment sharper instead of weaker, exactly at the moment you'd expect the opposite to be true? Here's the first thing genuinely worth knowing. You're not imagining any of this, and you're definitely not alone in noticing it happening. This exact shift shows up again and again in people over 50, and most of them simply assume it's luck, personality, or coincidence. It rarely feels dramatic in the moment it happens. No single event marks the change clearly. It shows up quietly instead in the small everyday decisions, the calmer reactions under pressure, the advice that suddenly makes more sense than it ever used to before. And it isn't only you noticing it either if you stop and think about it. People around you, your grown kids, your younger co-workers, your closest friends, often comment on it too, usually without realizing they're accidentally describing something researchers have studied quite closely. Because here's the honest truth. What you're experiencing isn't just a fluke, and it isn't merely confidence built up from decades of experience alone. According to psychologists who study this directly, something measurable really does appear to change in how your brain processes complex, emotionally loaded situations. This isn't the story we're all generally used to hearing about brains after 50. We're told again and again to expect things to get harder, slower, less sharp with every passing year. But that familiar story is, at best, incomplete. And in some very specific, well-studied ways, it's simply wrong. So before we go any further, let's actually look closely at what researchers who study this directly have genuinely found. Because the real picture turns out to be more interesting and considerably more encouraging than almost anyone walking in expects it to be. Psychologist Igor Grossmann at the University of Waterloo has spent years carefully studying something he calls wise reasoning, the ability to weigh multiple perspectives fairly, tolerate real uncertainty, and actively search for compromise in the middle of conflict. And his findings across many studies are strikingly consistent. According to this body of research, people across North America tend to score meaningfully higher on measures of wise reasoning as they move steadily through their 50s and 60s, compared directly with much younger adults facing those exact same difficult dilemmas. In these carefully designed studies, older adults were consistently more likely to recognize the genuine limits of their own knowledge, consider more than one side of a conflict fairly, and actively search for compromise instead of simply picking one single right answer and defending it. There's a second important piece to this story too. Cognitive scientists carefully distinguish between fluid intelligence, quick, raw processing speed for brand new problems, and crystallized intelligence, which is accumulated knowledge and pattern recognition slowly built over an entire lifetime of living. Research consistently shows that crystallized intelligence keeps rising well into your 60s, even as raw fluid processing speed gradually, naturally slows down. That accumulated pattern recognition becomes an entirely alternate pathway to good decisions, one that gets measurably stronger with time, not weaker. And there's real, replicated evidence around emotional regulation too. Multiple independent studies find that older adults are, on average, noticeably better at managing difficult emotions in the actual moment, which may genuinely explain exactly why that argument didn't manage to pull you under this time around. Here's the part almost nobody ever tells you. To be fully honest, researchers themselves are careful to say this pattern isn't universal or fully automatic for every single person. Some specific studies find no meaningful age difference in wise reasoning about deeply personal conflicts. Cultural context appears to genuinely matter here too. Direct comparisons between American and Japanese adults found the actual size of this age-related wisdom gap depends heavily on the type of conflict being reasoned through, whether it's personal, interpersonal, or between entire groups. So this isn't some kind of guarantee, and it definitely isn't magic. But across a genuinely striking number of independent studies, the general direction stays consistent. Complex reasoning, emotional steadiness, and crystallized judgment all tend to strengthen, not weaken, through this particular stage of life. Which means that calm you felt during the argument, that clarity in the advice you gave without thinking twice, that fast, confident decision you barely noticed making, those likely weren't accidents or simply lucky moments. They were closer to expected outcomes of decades your brain quietly put to work. Scientists were genuinely wrong about a lot of this for a very long time, focusing almost entirely on what gets slower or harder with age, while barely studying what actually gets measurably better in the process. That imbalance is finally, slowly starting to change. And that's the real twist worth sitting with here. The parts of your mind that make you genuinely wise, reading people fairly, staying calm under real pressure, knowing what actually matters in the end, were never really fading the way everyone quietly warned you they would for years. So the next time you make a fast, calm decision and quietly wonder where exactly that clarity came from, you don't have to explain it away as pure luck anymore. There's real, published research suggesting your brain has been steadily building toward exactly this moment. The advice you now give without even trying particularly hard? That's not random luck either, as it turns out. That's decades of accumulated pattern recognition finally paying off in real time, exactly when the people around you seem to need it the most. This doesn't mean everything about this stage of life feels easy or simple. It clearly doesn't, and no single video should ever pretend otherwise to make you feel better. But this particular part, the part about judgment and wisdom, genuinely seems to be moving in your favor. So maybe it's worth noticing, on purpose, the very next time you handle something calmly that would have completely wrecked you decades ago. That's not nothing at all. That's your mind quietly doing something it has spent an entire lifetime carefully learning how to do well. Trust that instinct a little more than you've been willing to lately. The research genuinely suggests it's earned, built from thousands of small lived moments you've already been through. Not some fluke you should feel the need to second-guess every single time it shows up. You're not just getting older, quietly and passively. In some very real, well-documented ways, you're becoming someone whose judgment the people around you are actively learning to trust more, including, eventually and maybe most importantly, yourself. If you've ever trusted your gut on something important and been right more often than you expected to be, this next part is for you. There are millions of people in their 50s and 60s going through exactly what you're going through. Most of them have never heard it explained this way. That's what this channel is for. Real psychology. Honest conversations. No pretending that this chapter of life is simple. If this helped you, subscribe. And if you know someone who needed to hear this today, share it with them.